What if I told you that the gods knew exactly how the world would end? Not in vague whispers or the cryptic riddles of the runes, but with a terrifying, absolute clarity. Odin the Allfather saw it all. He saw the licking flames, the suffocating chaos, and the final, crushing moment when the universe would go silent. He had stared directly into the threads of fate, woven by the Norns at the tangled roots of Yggdrasil, and they had shown him the slow, agonizing unraveling of the 9 realms. And yet, despite all his power, he could do nothing. Because there is one force in the universe stronger than gods, stronger than the crack of thunder, and stronger than the oldest monsters: fate. Odin sat alone in the high hall of Valhalla, where the golden light of the hearth fires reflected off the ancient runes carved into the soaring walls. His one remaining eye glimmered in the dim light. The other was lost forever to the well of wisdom, traded for knowledge he could never forget and secrets that now weighed heavy on his soul. In cold visions, he had seen the death of his beloved Baldur, the violent eruption of the wolf Fenrir, the rise of the world serpent Jörmungandr, and the final bloody battles where even mighty Thor would fall. Each vision was sharper than the last, a jagged knife slicing through the fabric of hope. He had trained for centuries, preparing for every threat, forging divine alliances, and gathering the greatest weapons ever conceived. And still, he knew that when the day of Ragnarok arrived, none of it would matter. Fate did not bend, fate did not plead, fate simply was. Loki, the trickster god, watched from the shifting shadows. He was patient, cunning, and smiling with a thin, sharp edge of malice. He had spent centuries sowing discord like a farmer plants grain, placing seeds of betrayal that would only bloom when the time was exactly right. Some called him cruel. He preferred to think of himself as inevitable. The chaos he brought was not random. It was destiny finally finding its stride. And yet, even Loki felt a sudden chill when he imagined the full scope of the coming storm. For even he knew that when the world itself began to tremble, even his clever mischief could be swallowed whole by the greater design. The first true crack in the cosmos came with the death of Baldur, the shining god of beauty, innocence, and joy. He was the golden child of the Aesir, and everything in the 9 realms had sworn a sacred oath never to harm him. The towering trees, the rushing rivers, even the silent stones themselves had promised peace. And yet he fell. It was Loki who orchestrated the tragedy. A simple branch of mistletoe, a seemingly harmless and fragile plant, became the instrument of the ultimate tragedy. Hod, Baldur's blind brother, guided by Loki's invisible, coaxing hands, loosed the fatal missile. In an instant, Baldur's laughter turned into a silence that echoed painfully across every realm. Freyja, his mother, wept until her strength failed. Tears of pure gold fell from her eyes, turning to hard crystal upon the cold stone floors of Asgard. Thor's massive hands shook with a rare mix of rage and utter helplessness. Even Odin's heart, hardened by millennia of wisdom and foresight, felt the hollow, rhythmic ache of loss. "This cannot be," Freyja whispered, her voice breaking like the winter wind through the mountains. But it was. Baldur, the shining light of the gods, was gone, and the darkness began to leak into the world. The universe noticed. Humans faltered in their work. Kings hesitated to give commands as a shadow crossed their hearts. Elves whispered anxiously among the silvered leaves of their dying forests. Dwarves banged desperately on their anvils, trying to craft protection against a fate they could not yet name. The first crack had appeared. It was fragile and almost invisible at first. Yet it widened steadily, growing into a black fissure that would soon swallow the 9 realms whole. Then came the cold, not just a bitter winter but Fimbulwinter, 3 long years of endless snow, biting ice, and absolute darkness. The sun, when it finally dared to rise, was pale, weak, and devoid of heat. Crops withered in the fields before they could even sprout. Rivers froze solid to their beds. Fires that had burned for generations flickered and died in the unnatural wind. Humans starved in the dark. Families betrayed each other for a crust of bread. Communities dissolved into a primal soup of desperation and blood. Every village became a battlefield of hunger and fear. And the 9 realms themselves began to feel the agonizing strain. In the deep forests, Elves tried to protect their ancient groves, but the leaves blackened under the frost and the branches splintered like glass. In the mountains, dwarves struggled to keep their great forges alive, but without fire, their magic and craft faltered into nothingness. Giants roamed the frozen wilderness, sensing the weakness of the gods, their ancient grudges stirring after centuries of waiting. Even the lesser gods felt the crushing weight. Every minor deity, every spirit of the woods, every guardian of the sacred realms sensed that the world's balance had tipped beyond repair. Chaos was no longer contained. It was creeping into the very marrow of existence, and Loki watched it all, patient and satisfied. Every act of betrayal, every whispered doubt, every frayed thread of trust he had sown now bore its bitter fruit. The gods would falter, just as they were always meant to. The ground began to shake with a rhythmic, terrifying force. Mountains groaned and valleys sank into the sea. And then, with a roar that shattered the crystal spheres of the heavens, the wolf Fenrir broke free. He was massive, unstoppable, his eyes burning with a primal, prehistoric fury. The chains that had bound him for centuries, forged by dwarves with magic older than memory, snapped like dry twigs. The wolf moved like a living earthquake, each step a shattering of the world beneath his paws. Odin had seen this in his dreams, yet nothing could prepare even the Allfather for the raw terror of the beast's presence. At sea, Jörmungandr stirred from his ancient slumber. The great serpent flexed its colossal coils, stretching its body around the entire world until it bit its own tail. Waves the size of mountains crashed against the shores, and coastal cities crumbled under the fury of the rising tides. Black venom spouted into the sky, tainting the very air and killing creatures both small and great. The 9 realms were engulfed in total chaos. Order was dead. Odin stepped forward onto the battlefield of Vigrid. He was calm. He was certain. His mind flashed across the centuries, the bloody battles he had fought, the hard-won wisdom he had gathered, and the personal failures he could never undo. He knew the end was coming. He knew the wolf's maw would eventually devour him, but he stood his ground anyway. Fenrir lunged, his jaws stretching from the earth to the sky. The earth shook with the vibration of his growl. Odin struck with his spear, Gungnir, the weapon that never missed. Fenrir's teeth snapped in the air, radiating a power beyond human imagining. The Allfather met the beast blow for blow. Divine magic and raw animal might intertwining in a clash that felt like the world itself was cracking open. He thought of Baldur. He thought of all the lives lost, the civilizations wiped from the map, and the dreams that would never be realized. And yet he fought because that is what a king does in the face of inevitable fate. But fate was precise and uncaring. Odin fell. The Allfather was gone, and a terrible silence descended over the heart of the world. Thunder tore across the blackened sky, and jagged lightning illuminated the gore-stained battlefield. Thor's rage was pure, a terrifying force of nature. He gripped the handle of Mjolnir until his knuckles turned white and charged into the surf. The serpent thrashed, its black venom filling the air and searing the lungs of the dying. Thor struck with all his godlike strength, each thunderous blow resonating across the 9 realms like the beating of a funeral drum. He knew he would die. He knew the poison was already seeping into his blood, but he struck anyway, a final, defiant scream against the inevitability of the end. The battle raged through the surf and the storm. Venom spattered across mountains, seas, and plains. Lightning tore through the dark clouds as Mjolnir struck again and again, sounding like the world being forged and destroyed all at once. The clash was violent and overwhelming. The sharp smell of ozone, the deafening roar of thunder, and the searing heat of fire and venom mixing into a storm that threatened to consume everything. Finally, with one last earth-shaking strike, Jörmungandr fell dead into the rising sea. Thor stood victorious for a single, flickering moment. He took one step, then another. 9 steps later, the serpent's poison overcame him. The god of thunder fell. The hero was gone. The world burned. Cities crumbled into the dust of history. Forests turned to gray ash. Oceans boiled and steamed. Mountains shattered like dropped pottery. Life itself seemed to weep as the stars fell from the sky. Every corner of the 9 realms felt the final impact. Giants screamed as their icy homes collapsed into the abyss. Elves fled their sacred forests, only to find them charred by fire and choked by frost. Dwarves clutched their masterpieces in despair as their mountain halls caved in. Humans cried out in confusion and terror as the ground vanished beneath their feet. Even the skis mourned, turning a deep, bruised purple, and the hungry seas swallowed everything in their final, drowning rage. The cycle was complete. The old world was dead. And yet, against all logic, life persisted. From the cooling ashes, small green shoots began to emerge from the blackened soil. The boiling rivers slowed and filled with fresh, clear water. The sun, or perhaps its daughter, returned to the sky, shedding a warm and gentle light. Life, stubborn, beautiful, and defiant, began to reclaim the scarred land. Some gods survived the fire. They were wounded, weary, and changed, but they were alive. They stepped into the new world carrying the heavy memory of the old and the wisdom of what had been lost. Humans emerged as well, appearing from the hollows of the world tree, small and fragile, but carrying the spark of hope. Ragnarok was not just the end of all things. It was the necessary, violent labor of a new beginning. The world burns, the world falls, and the world rises again. Always. Forever. Thank you for listening. The cycle of the 9 realms has closed, but the stories of the ancients never truly die. If you felt the thunder of Thor's hammer or the chill of Fimbulwinter, show your support by striking that like button and subscribing to join our Hall of Legends. We are just beginning our journey through the shadows of history and myth. What forgotten tale should we uncover next? Is there a god, a monster, or a lost civilization you want to see brought to life? Leave a comment below with your suggestions. The most requested saga will be our next destination. Until the next sun rises, farewell.